The continuation of the story of a great man, Kwame Nkrumah. We are continuing on where we stopped on how he moved deeper into Pan-African diplomacy, founding the Organization of African Unity in 1963. He pushed for a continental government, a shared currency, a joint army. His book, Africa Must Unite, became a blueprint for continental revolution, but many leaders, still guarding their young sovereignties, were not ready for Nkrumah's bold vision. Still, he marched on. Even as Kwame Nkrumah's name rose across continents, as he became a symbol of African pride and resistance, his personal life remained shrouded in discipline, solitude, and secrecy. The man who had rallied millions lived a life of intense focus, often at the expense of his own emotional needs. For years, Nkrumah had been married to the cause of African freedom, but in 1957, the year Ghana gained independence, he would marry a woman, a decision as symbolic as it was strategic. Her name was Fathia Halim Rizk, an elegant, soft-spoken Coptic Christian woman from Egypt. The match was orchestrated not by romance, but by politics. Nkrumah and Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser shared not only revolutionary ideals, but a deep friendship and mutual respect. The marriage was proposed as a bridge between West Africa and North Africa, a personal symbol of the Pan-African unity both leaders cherished. The wedding took place in Accra on New Year's Eve 1957, just months after independence. It was a spectacle of symbolism, a union of two great African civilizations, Ghana and Egypt. Fathia arrived speaking little English, dressed in traditional attire, and holding tightly to a new life she had only just begun to understand. For many Ghanaians, the marriage was unexpected, even controversial. Why not a Ghanaian woman? But Nkrumah had always thought in continental terms. Fathia was not just a wife. She was the embodiment of the African unity he envisioned. Their marriage produced 3 children, Gamal, Samia, and Sekou, each named after revolutionaries and close allies. Despite the demands of statehood, Nkrumah was known to be a gentle and protective father. He adored his children, especially Samia, who would one day grow to walk in his political footsteps. Yet behind the walls of Flagstaff House, the marriage was not always easy. Nkrumah's life was consumed by politics, diplomacy, and ideological warfare. He traveled constantly, often working late into the night. Fathia, isolated by language and culture, found herself a quiet figure in a turbulent palace. Though respected, she was rarely seen in public after the early years of their union. Still, Nkrumah kept her close. He understood the weight she carried as First Lady of a young African republic, as the bridge between Arab and Black Africa, as the mother of a symbolic family. In private moments, when the speeches had ended and the crowds had dispersed, he would write to her, reflect, and pray. Their marriage, though not romantic in the conventional sense, stood as a testament to Nkrumah's vision that Africa, divided by geography and colonization, could unite across its many differences. Just as he had united a nation, he had chosen a partner from another corner of the continent, because to him Africa was one. But the pressures of leadership, mounting political tensions, and the storm gathering around his presidency meant their family life would be short-lived. As the years passed and the world changed, both Kwame and Fathia would be forced to endure separation, not by choice, but by the forces of history itself. By the mid-1960s, the bright promise of Ghana's independence had dimmed under the weight of economic hardship, political repression, and global Cold War tensions. Kwame Nkrumah, once hailed as the African Messiah, now found himself increasingly isolated from his people, from the international community, and in many ways from the dream he had once so clearly envisioned. The grand projects he had launched, hydroelectric dams, industrial factories, and a national airline, were built with borrowed money. The Akosombo Dam, a massive symbol of modern power and African potential, came with staggering costs and controversial ties to American and British corporations. Ghana's foreign reserves dwindled, cocoa prices plummeted, and the country slid into debt. Unemployment rose, inflation spiked. Whispers of discontent grew louder. But Nkrumah's answer was not retreat. He doubled down. He tightened state control over the economy. He expanded the security apparatus, empowering the Preventive Detention Act to arrest and imprison anyone suspected of subversion. Political opponents vanished overnight. Dissenting newspapers were shut down. Freedom once promised was now conditional, granted only to those who agreed with the revolution. Nkrumah's vision of African unity also began to draw fire. While many African leaders admired his passion, they feared his ambition. His call for a single continental government, a common army, and a single currency seemed to some dangerously utopian. Others believed he wanted to lead such a union himself. Suspicion and jealousy brewed among Africa's newly independent leaders. At home, the once unshakable adoration of the people began to erode. The long speeches and slogans no longer fed empty stomachs. The grand celebrations no longer masked the growing despair. Opposition figures, once silenced, became martyrs in the eyes of a disillusioned public. The state grew more paranoid, more rigid, the people more restless. In February 1966, while Nkrumah was on a diplomatic mission to Hanoi, Vietnam, seeking to mediate during the escalating Vietnam War, fate struck its cruelest blow. A group of Ghanaian military and police officers, backed by civilian elites and with whispers of foreign encouragement, staged a coup d'etat. It was swift, bloodless, and decisive. Radio Ghana crackled with the announcement, "Kwame Nkrumah has been overthrown." In a matter of hours, his statues were pulled down. His writings were banned. His image, once everywhere, was scrubbed from the public square. The man who had led Ghana to independence, who had spoken of black pride and African dignity, was now branded a tyrant, a failure, an enemy of the very nation he built. Nkrumah, heartbroken and in disbelief, flew not back to Accra but to Conakry, Guinea. There, his old friend and fellow revolutionary, President Ahmed Sékou Touré, received him with open arms and declared him honorary co-president of Guinea. It was a gesture of respect and sorrow. Africa had turned its back on its greatest champion. In exile, Nkrumah lived in a villa guarded by Guinean soldiers. He was safe, but alone. He continued to write prolifically, books on imperialism, neo-colonialism, African unity. He kept a framed photograph of Ghana's Independence Day on his desk, a constant reminder of what once was. Letters from supporters still trickled in, though most had moved on. The world had shifted. The revolution had paused. His health began to fail. Years of stress, heartbreak, and solitude took their toll. He watched from afar as the military rulers in Ghana unraveled much of what he had built. Schools and factories fell into disrepair. His dream of a united Africa seemed further away than ever. Yet even in exile, Nkrumah remained defiant. In speeches broadcast from Conakry, he urged Africans to resist imperialism, to believe in themselves. He warned of neo-colonialism, foreign domination wearing the mask of aid and trade. His words fell on fewer ears, but their truth remained undimmed. To the world, he was a fallen idol. To the imperial powers, a silenced threat. But to the faithful, he was still Osagyefo, the Redeemer. As the 1970s dawned, Kwame Nkrumah, the once unstoppable force of African liberation, found himself living not in the Ghana he had fought for, but in exile, in Conakry, the capital of Guinea. From the towering ambitions of Flagstaff House, he now resided in a quiet, state-protected villa, his days marked by reading, writing, and occasional correspondence with the few comrades who still believed in his vision. Time had worn him down, not in spirit, but in body. The strength that had carried a continent's hopes began to fade. His hair turned silver, and the once fiery voice now emerged in raspy tones. Yet he remained intellectually sharp and endlessly restless. He wrote feverishly, "Class struggle in Africa, neo-colonialism, the last stage of imperialism. The struggle continues," his words still ringing with resistance, still refusing to surrender. But Africa was moving on. Ghana was under military rule. The very schools and monuments he had built were now stripped of his name. Statues of him had been toppled, books burned, his legacy buried under accusations of authoritarianism and economic mismanagement. The same hands that once clapped for him now pointed in blame. In his letters and memoirs, a quiet sadness emerges. Not bitterness, but heartbreak. The dream had not died, but it had been delayed, distorted, even betrayed. He had believed so completely, so deeply in the unity of Africa that the continent's disunity tore at him like a wound that refused to heal. In 1971, his health took a sharp decline. Diagnosed with prostate cancer, he traveled to Bucharest, Romania for treatment under the care of the socialist bloc that still admired him. He was far from home, in a foreign land, among doctors and strangers. The hospital walls were cold, the air sterile. It was a tragic irony that the man who once stood before millions now lay dying alone, surrounded not by his people, but by silence. On April 27, 1972, Kwame Nkrumah passed away, aged just 62. The news stunned the world. In Ghana, the military government allowed his body to be returned, not in glory but in quiet mourning. For days, people lined the roads in sorrow. The same country that had overthrown him now wept. Old men who had marched for independence bowed their heads. Mothers told their children stories of a man who once dared to make them believe they could be free. He was buried first in Nkroful, his birthplace, and later reinterred in a grand mausoleum in Accra, where today the Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park stands, an eternal reminder that no matter how far a man falls, his legacy can rise again. Kwame Nkrumah's death in 1972 left Africa with a profound sense of loss, but also with an enduring sense of his presence. In the years following his passing, his legacy became the subject of much debate and reflection. For many, he remained the father of African liberation, the man who had ignited the spark of independence across the continent. For others, particularly those who had once followed him, he became a symbol of what happens when ambition eclipses caution and ideals give way to authoritarianism. In Ghana, however, the story was more complex. Nkrumah had given birth to a nation, but his fall from grace had left scars on the very people he sought to uplift. The military rulers who overthrew him in 1966 attempted to erase his memory, but his spirit refused to be suppressed. His name was too powerful, his ideas too deeply embedded in the fabric of the African struggle. In the decades following his death, Nkrumah's ideas would rise again. His calls for Pan-African unity, for African economic independence, for the rejection of neo-colonialism became central to a new generation of African thinkers and activists. Movements in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, in Kenya, and across the continent, some inspired by his writings, others by his very example, came to see Nkrumah not as a failed leader, but as a visionary whose time had not yet come. In Ghana, his legacy began to be reclaimed in the 1990s. The very leaders who had once disowned him now sought to honor his memory. Statues were erected, schools and streets were named after him. A nation that had once turned its back on him now recognized the debt it owed. The Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park in Accra stands as a testament to his place in history, a place where the past and future of Ghana and Africa meet. But Nkrumah's influence is not confined to monuments and speeches. His message continues to resonate with those who seek a world where Africa's resources, minds, and destiny belong to Africans themselves. He was not simply a politician, he was a philosopher, a man who believed that Africa's future could only be secured through unity, self-determination, and collective action. Even in his final years, Nkrumah understood that his work was not for him alone but for the future, a future where African nations would stand side by side as equals on the world stage. And though he did not live to see it, his dream of Africa's political and economic integration lives on in the efforts of the African Union, in the growing continental trade, and in the rising voices of African leaders demanding more for their people. In the end, Nkrumah was more than just a man. He was a symbol of Africa's struggle, its triumphs and its tragedies. He represented the longing for freedom, the crushing weight of history, and the unwavering belief that Africa could be self-reliant and proud. Kwame Nkrumah may have left this world in 1972, but his message is far from finished. He may have died in exile, a fallen hero in the eyes of many, but his ideas, his passion, and his spirit will forever echo in the hearts of those who dare to dream of a united, strong, and free Africa. Kwame Nkrumah's life is a powerful reminder that the struggle for freedom is never without sacrifice. His journey, from a small village in Nkrumah to the presidency of an independent Ghana, and finally into exile, reveals the unyielding pursuit of a dream larger than one man's life. He was a man whose vision for Africa transcended borders and whose legacy continues to shape the continent's path. Though the world sometimes casts aside its heroes, they do not fade into oblivion. They remain in the shadows of our dreams and the whispers of our hopes, reminding us that the fight for justice, unity, and freedom is never truly over. Kwame Nkrumah may have fallen, but like the roots of a great tree, his influence continues to grow, deepening into the soil of the continent he loved, forever nourishing the hopes of future generations. His dreams of African unity are not just memories of a time gone by, they are living ideals that continue to shape the future, Africa's future. And in this way, Kwame Nkrumah lives on, eternally part of the African soul. Thank you for tuning in. If you found this content helpful, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications to stay updated on our latest posts. See you next time.